No game lives in a vacuum, but some do wear their influences more obviously than others. Ready or Not is a spiritual successor to the 2005 Irrational Games developed cult PC classic SWAT 4, an inspiration that has Ready or Not coming out the gate with a high bar to meet. Because the twist that a SWAT game brings over a conventional military shooter is rules of engagement and civilian avoidance, demanding tight level and encounter design to make those ROEs relevant. A bevy of non-lethal tools encourage you to restrain and capture targets in addition to just shooting them. And it also means that every frantic NPC entering the frame is just as likely to be a terrified innocent as an armed suspect. Tight corridors and low time to kill will have you maintaining trigger discipline and an alertness towards who's on the other end of your barrel. All the more fun and intense when playing with a real group of friends, the coordination of which demands clean callouts and sound strategies. But at the same time, some inconsistent technical performance and a lack of narrative direction in its mission design prevent it from reaching the same heights as its inspiration. It's a game that absolutely scratches the itch, recreating the mechanical underpinnings of the life and death special weapons and tactics scenarios that made SWAT 4 such a classic. It just contents itself with leaving it at that. I think what surprised me the most upon starting up Ready or Not was the level of approachability that's way higher than its gritty sim-like premise would suggest. You have WASD movements and lean buttons like any other shooter you've ever played, with the only real sim-like control twist being a lean modifier to peer harder, and the fact that where you'd expect a run button to be is actually replaced by a go slower button to help muffle movement sounds and keep aiming straight. Because although Ready or Not is difficult, most of that difficulty is coming from macro-level coordination and tactics rather than micro-level input complexity. This is evident nowhere clearer than one of the inputs it takes directly from SWAT 4, a contextual use button that does a ton of the heavy lifting, opening doors, picking locks, and gathering evidence, all sharing the same default F key as the most universal SWAT problem-solving tool of all, a verbal demand for compliance when your gun's aimed at someone.
Get down, I want to see hands! Get on the ground, now!
It's a control scheme that'll be picked up in moments and you'll barely feel the need to take a stroll through its in-game training gallery to figure it out, instead putting all of its difficulty onboarding squarely on encounter and level design. In Ready or Not, every doorway is a portal to danger, opening yourself up to an entire new room's worth of unfavorable sightlines and hidden foes. Breaches need to be combined with flashbang grenades and a prompt coordinated examination of all four corners, lest you're met with an instant death and no opportunity to respawn. This is where Ready or Not gets its hardcore edge that you wouldn't feel in its arcadey control scheme. Enemies are abundant, aggressive, and waiting for you to make one wrong move. There aren't hit markers that'll confirm your bullets are landing, and there's no directional damage indicator on inbound strikes, so you won't know where you're getting shot from unless you see the muzzle flash. The UI isn't here to give you an advantage, making you reliant on in-universe techniques to ensure visibility is strong like flashlights and night vision goggles. By default, there isn't even any obvious indicator that marks your allies. In the heat of an intense firefight, you'll need to prioritize verbal communication and positioning to ensure you don't get friendly fired. And it is massively compelling, assuming you have a like-minded friend or friends that will take on the missions with you. This is a co-op experience that gives the challenge in all the right ways, with maps frequently requiring multiple attempts to finish, let alone score highly on. It uses a classless system, but a high level of loadout diversity will have you and your teammates naturally slotting into roles regardless. Heavy armor and riot shields will give you confidence to lead the charge, and small cameras can slip underneath doorways to scout out rooms ahead. You want to report downed enemies to headquarters and restrain everyone you run into, lest you'll take a dock on your final score or potentially leave a liability at your rear. There's nothing like a clean, coordinated run through one of these levels after multiple failed attempts. It gives this immersive satisfaction to a job well done, and it's overcoming these tough SWAT challenges with some friends where the game is absolutely at its peak. There's even robust mod support with a menu accessible in-game, where small gameplay tweaks and entire custom maps can be downloaded and played. SWAT 4 level recreations are a community staple and ones that I engaged with frequently. If slow-paced strategy combat within a co-op focused framework is an experience you're looking for, it's easy to recommend, especially if you're open to modding, which will multiply the amount of worthwhile fun you'll get. But that recommendation does come with some asterisks. Two big ones specifically based on my experience. the first of which is consistent technical difficulties. Jittery frame rates, character models trying and failing to interact with the ground properly, and rain falling indoors happened with relative frequency. There was even one bug we were able to reliably reproduce where battering down a particular door in a particular level would always cause my teammates to simultaneously disconnect.
Ready? Wow. In the review.
A flaw whose annoyance is magnified by the fact you can't just rejoin a game in progress and need to back out to the lobby and start over again. This is where the early access tag is most obviously felt, and it's an experience echoed by a lot of discussion I've been finding online, where many have reported they've actually had worsened performance based on a few recent patches. But to me, that actually pairs in comparison to Ready or Not's biggest hurdle to overcome, because when I was playing my way through these levels, I couldn't help but feel this sort of hollowness, something I couldn't pin down exactly but I knew was missing. And it was actually after I booted up Swat 4 again that it slapped me in the face with how obvious it was. Ready or Not doesn't have any narrative focus. At the time of recording, there is no campaign. The levels are selected and played in any order. You'll get a thin written premise about what you're going into and then you're off. There's an attempt to weave stories within the design of the levels, but with few exceptions, it doesn't really have any moments that hit in the same way SWAT is able to produce in almost every level. If narrative justification and good storytelling sounds like a weird thing to be expecting out of a hardcore police co-op shooter, you might be surprised to find out that's one of the things SWAT 4 does really well, and arguably why it's fondly remembered among a sea of other sim-like PC shooters. It's unsurprising to anyone who's played it or who recognizes the pedigree of its studio. Despite having their branding flipped somewhere in between, SWAT 4's Irrational Games is the same team that would go on to make BioShock only 2 years later. A game lauded for its ability to create an imaginative and realistic world with stories woven into the fabric of the level design. These are qualities no doubt shared by SWAT 4, if not as obvious to point out because they're presented in a realistic pseudo-New York instead of an underwater fantasy world. There are moments in SWAT 4 where you turn a corner and just get hit in the stomach, with a murderer's room that acts as a punchline to deliver on the setup of rooms prior. Hints and clues hidden within suggest maybe your mission objectives didn't understand the full depth and depravity that the suspect was truly operating at. There's 911 calls that give you a glimpse at the victim's side of the conflict and humanize some of the NPCs you're trying to extract. There's timelines within your police briefing and drawn level diagrams that ground the encounter in a believable realism that comes from incomplete information being patched together and presented to you. There's an escalation of storytelling oddity and even gameplay challenge that comes from having levels laid out in a campaign, something the scattershot map level selection of Ready or Not can't compete with. We'd go from being stuck on a level for multiple nights and needing to perfect our strategies to beating the next on the first try within 3 minutes, giving Ready or Not a weird, lopsided sense of progression. So what we're missing within Ready or Not is largely intra-mission storytelling and inter-mission escalation. It's why I can recall even throwaway beginner villains from SWAT like the law school strangler who's drunk on his own media coverage, but I don't think I could name a single character within Ready or Not. Without that delicate curation or narrative justification beyond a small paragraph at mission onset, Ready or Not's levels lack moments. They're balanced and optimized levels with multiple points of access and adequate co-op challenge, but without an emphasis on narrative, it's hard to see them as anything other than tacky shooting galleries. The real meat of whether or not Ready or Not is a worthwhile successor to SWAT is largely going to depend on the aspects of SWAT that resonated with you in the first place. If it was the tactical death-come-quick gameplay, or even if you're coming with no prior expectations from SWAT to begin with, then Ready or Not delivers on a competent, if not superb, modern mechanical facsimile of SWAT 4's formula, albeit one with technical optimization that leaves a lot to be desired. But if it was the iconic levels that daisy-chain you through micro-stories with little narrative beats, or the level of immersion that comes from putting yourself within a world, then your only hope is that the promise of a campaign yet to come actually happens, and if and when it does, it actually delivers. Ready or Not can be recommended as a fun co-op game with a slow burn strategic focus, but if your hope is that it attains the heights of its classic inspiration, then it's not ready.